swear it's been like 100 miles an hour since the moment I woke up this morning.
Well, the odd thing is that because we're of Mexican descent, etc., we're the ones who have to have opinions right away on immigration. What's going on? It's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, shouldn't everyone? This is an issue for everybody. It affects every single citizen in this country. You know, it's almost like, okay, this is we're all the Canadian Americans and how they feel about the Canadians being deported. Oh, wait a minute.
Well, I'm
They,
actually going to have some Canadian on my show, by the way, on
mhm.
Wednesday, talking about the tariffs.
Nice,
Yeah. So, anyways.
nice. Yeah, I think there's about combined 2 million Canadian, UK, Brits here illegally. They just, they blend in with the wallpaper, Brandon.
Yeah, those are the worst ones too. You can find them by their sense of humor.
Or as I said in the video, or at hacky sack
Hacky sack. There
hangouts.
you go.
There's always, it's always good to have levity and like real. These are intense situations. We're talking about illegal immigration. We're talking about mass deportation. Let's take that name, mass deportation. I think it's more of a just kind of an ugly catchphrase. I never liked it. I haven't liked it. But really, these are targeted deportations
Yeah.
from what I've seen and from what is fact. These are actually very targeted deportations, which I wish this administration would, more eloquently freaking, explain themselves. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. Well, it is targeted deportation because that's all the government has resources to carry it out. Now, there's not a
Hmm.
doubt in my mind that if Donald Trump could, would he engage in mass deportations? Probably. But it doesn't matter. They don't have the resources to do it, and they don't have the
Hmm.
legal footing to do it, frankly.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
they've said, Homan has said, they're targeting the 1.4 million people who have already been served deportation orders. People who have already been convicted of crimes or committed
Hmm.
crimes. He has said that when there are people there during the arrest, that they'll be detained. He didn't say they were going to be
Hmm.
deported, but he said that the government reserves the right to detain them. Um, but yeah, it's a targeted operation, and I think it's really disingenuous to call it mass deportation. And I think that the journalists and the activists who throw
Hmm.
around that term lightly are doing the
Hmm.
bidding of Trump and instilling just as much fear in the community as ICE ever could.
So let's go on the other side, right? And I'm with you, man. I'm with you. Let's go on the other side. Throwing the fear where the left really knee jerk and reaction into fear. Here's a question I had from one of my members of the channel, from Vincent Breeden. He's a great conversation on this topic. Dumb question though. How does an American citizen get deported from the United States? Because the voices on the left are saying, "Gotta look out. The American citizen who's brown, you're gonna get deported."
Yeah,
I mean, that is. I mean, I'm not making that up, and people really believe that.
right.
So, I mean, legally, you can't get deported if you're an American citizen.
Yeah, as of right now, as far
Right.
as like I'm assuming that is in relation to birthright citizenship, which seems to be sort of at the forefront of the debate because Trump had
Mm-hmm.
signed that executive order, basically trying to rescind aspects of the 14th Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
As of right now, no, you're still a citizen. Like there's nothing that Trump can do about that. A circuit court temporarily halted his executive order anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Trump knew that was going to happen. The whole
Mm-hmm.
reason Trump did this was to send it through the courts. So it's going to go through a couple courts and eventually it will end up at the Supreme Court. And I think that his thinking is to basically just force the court, the Supreme Court, the final law of the land, to clarify what the 14th Amendment means. Now, I'll
Mm-hmm.
say something that's of interest to your audience and to anybody else following this. The United States did make one ruling at one other time in 1898, and that was United States versus Wong Kim Ark. And that was a Chinese person who, at the time of his birth,
Hmm.
was subject to the Emperor of China. but
Mm.
had a permanent domicile and residence in the United States, and they're carrying on business. So let's see here, and are not employed by diplomatic or official capacity under the Empire of China, automatically became a U.S. citizen at birth. So as long
Mm.
as he was not carrying on the business of China at the time, the Supreme Court ruled that he was a citizen. And so there is some precedent here. And so the reason I bring that up is Supreme Courts often don't like to overturn precedents. They just refer to it. And so I think that this is on the side of immigrants. Now, there's a chance that they overturn it. They overturned Roe v. Wade, and there's been, a few surprises in the past 5 years.
Mm.
But I think it's unlikely because the amount of people that would be forced to leave the country, I just don't think the Supreme Court's going to do it.
Trump's been busy, man. He's been very busy, not just on the immigration front, but that's another discussion for another day. You guys put up this article. You guys can check out the Daily Chella and their Substack. You guys are doing great stuff over there. Make sure you guys go and be a subscriber there. Here's a misinformation. Did ICE show up at a high school? No, ICE did not show up at a high school. There was a report last week which stated agents that showed up to a high school in Chicago, but it turned out to be false information. It was the Secret Service. Some of their agents visited Hamlin Elementary while investigating threats made against a government official under the agency's protection. In other words, ICE never went to high school and then never went to that high school, but social media just ran wild with it.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, this is one of one of the, it's like the Achilles heel of social media.
Mm-hmm.
Once something's out there, it's like a wildfire. It just spreads, and the more sensational it seems, or the more it seems to confirm somebody's bias,
Mm-hmm.
the bigger audience there is. And so this took off, and there's a lot of people still who think that ICE was showing up at schools in Chicago because they haven't seen the correction by that news outlet that originally put it out. So
Lovely, right?
yeah, you just have to be really engaged as
Yeah.
a news consumer. And I mean, most of the facts that come out within 24 hours of a story, anyways, are always going to be wrong. So you can just assume that probably what you're seeing right after the fact is going to be corrected later on.
Can ICE agents raid a private business without a warrant?
No, they need a warrant. I mean, just because there might be undocumented immigrants
Mm-hmm.
working there, it's not like they aren't still entitled to rights. I think that's a misnomer because even undocumented immigrants are entitled to rights,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you don't even know if they're undocumented yet. You can't just go
Mm-hmm.
off on an assumption in the same way that you can't go off on an assumption and just pull somebody over for how they're dressed. At least you're not supposed to be able to do that. And so, yeah, they've got to go through a process to get a warrant to raid these farms. And frankly, I don't think they're going to be raiding farms. And if they do, I bet you they're targeted and they're not going to be widespread and prolonged
Mm-hmm.
just because of the nature of who they're targeting and the resources that the government has.
Mm-hmm. Well, here as of recording this video today, Brandon, you have 2,373 criminal illegal aliens, including everyone from pedophiles, gangbangers, MS-13, Tren de Agua, traffickers, drapists, terrorists, have been arrested and deported by Trump's ICE, FBI, ATF, DEA, and the U.S. Marshal Service in just the first 6 days of taking office.
Yeah, well, I take some of what the government reports with a grain of salt. I
Sure.
mean, I hope
Fair
that
enough.
the people they're going after are
Hmm.
legitimately people who, are dangerous people or hurting children, child traffickers, and things like that shouldn't be
Hmm.
here. They should be
Hmm.
kicked out or go to prison. But I also know that the federal government, sometimes can bend the truth to push its own agenda. And so that's the role of the media to kind of hold government accountable. The problem is who is holding media accountable. And so,
You are.
we're sort of in this cycle here where
Uh,
it's tough to even trust the media at times with the information they're putting out because they're also, driven by their own
Absolutely.
agendas. And
Absolutely.
so it just comes down to the news consumer. Um, the people who the government is supposed to work for, to try to make sure that they're operating legally and doing what they say they're doing and not going above and beyond or abusing their power.
Let's go back to your article. Do states have to comply?
States don't have to comply. I mean, we live in a federalist society. Like, there's separation of the federal government and states. But the federal government can certainly incentivize states to comply by threatening to pull their funding, by pinching the purse
Hmm.
strings and saying, hey, we're going to pull back funding for roads or for schools.
Hmm.
Usually that's what the federal government does to force states to comply. But there are plenty
Hmm.
of examples in history where the states didn't comply and refused to the bitter end until the federal government gave in. I mean,
Hmm.
one of those examples is prohibition, right? So you had prohibition, alcohol was outlawed
Mm.
for some years,
Hmm.
and you had a number of states, I believe New York was the first one, that eventually just said, you know what, we're just going to legalize alcohol again. And that's what they did. And the federal government hated it. Then more states did it. Then more states did it. And it got so out of control that eventually the federal government just backed off. I mean, you see that time and time again in history. You saw it with slavery. I mean, it was
Mm.
individual states that freed slaves before the federal government
Well, isn't
engaged
that
in the
also
War of
what?
Free
Yeah,
State.
and isn't that also what they're doing in regards to abortion?
Yeah, I mean, it's back to the states, and each state can sort of decide what they want to do, and
Yeah,
every state kind of has its own culture,
it's
and so
its own laws with it. Well, for better for worse. Correct. Okay, so last one here. Was birthright citizenship overturned? And you kind of already talked about that. The 14th Amendment was originally in regards to slavery, children's of slaves, correct?
I don't know. I saw that
Hmm.
floating around. I'm not a historian when it comes to the 14th
What?
Amendment as far as that
You
goes.
should know everything, Brandon. Come
I
on.
know. I wish I should have been a constitutional lawyer.
Nice.
I can't tell you. I know that the 14th Amendment wasn't overturned and that a circuit judge froze it and it's going to go through the court system to the Supreme Court. But I don't know everything about the history of the 14th Amendment. And I'm sure I'm going to be learning a lot more as this discussion continues because I don't see the discussion going anywhere until the Supreme Court rules.
No, and this is like we had just mentioned. It's only January 27th. It what? 7 days?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I think that the Supreme Court can speed up the process once it gets to them, but they can't
Mhm.
circumvent the other courts. They still have to wait for it to go through the other courts. So,
Any other misconceptions? It seems that the stuff's coming up almost every day in regards to illegal immigration, stuff that's getting out there. Anything that you want to bring up, or kind of just kind of like advise people on when they're
well, I think the
getting their
biggest
news?
misconception is that brown people don't have rights. That somehow this is some takeover and Trump's just going to kick out whoever he wants and do whatever he wants.
Hmm.
That's not what's going to happen. And that's not what can happen. Like, there are rules and there are laws in this country and freedoms in this country. So you don't have to be afraid. You have every right to walk the streets of this country just like everybody else. And you should. You should be out there and be proud and not be afraid and not show fear because you aren't being targeted. This is not like a blanket targeting of brown people, even though some people are painting it as that. And if it becomes that,
Hmm.
then you have rights. Brown people have rights.
Um, no, that's very well said, man. Very well said. And it seems that we're gonna have to go through a lot before uh, we'll see how this all comes out. I would hope for some good reform. I would hope for a freeze on the border, so we can just kind of end the chaos a little bit.
Yeah.
And I would hope that people get really really educated, like really do your research.
Yeah, you're going to have to. And I'll just end by I'll say this, like, I think it's very disingenuous for the Democrat Party to come back into the mix and pretend like somehow they're pro immigration when Kamal's entire campaign was basically cracked down on the border. And when Biden himself deported 1.5 million undocumented immigrants and deported more people his last year as president than Trump did. So this idea that they're going to come in, all of a sudden they're pro-immigrant, it's all a facade.
The amnesia is real.
Yeah.
But Obama's words said, if you come in here illegally, you will be deported.
Right.
That,
Yeah.
that was when he was president. So, yeah. I mean, there. How about to be continued? And we'll check in with you every so often because I wanted to get this out. I just think that there's a lot of just idiotic misinformation, and people are just just literally acting on emotion, Brandon.
Yeah. No, it's the same thing that happened with COVID. I mean, and what
Wow.
happened with COVID, we reached a point where if you're standing and ordering, you wear a mask. If you're sitting and eating fries, you can remove the mask, even though there's no difference whatsoever.
Mm,
I mean, it was just crazy, like the things that people will do when they're driven by emotion. And this is no different. Like we've got to back up and slow down.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right, you can catch Brandon at the Daily Chella, dailychella.com, YouTube. What else, Brandon?
Well, I'm most active on YouTube these days and Instagram and of course X. So you can follow me at Brandon Lauren Maxwell. Thanks for having me on, Polly.
All right, brother. We'll see you soon.
All right.